this event, and thank you to Deborah and Clinton to welcome us. So I'm very happy to be here because, in fact, 3 years ago I was not thinking I would publish this book because originally it was a comparative project I had to compare the French, the British, and the American denaturalization laws and policies in the 20th century. I was thinking at that time, based on the book, the only book that was published by a US congressman named John Levy Cable, on denaturalization in the US, that it was something that has happened in time of war in this country, like it has happened in the UK or in France. In fact, I discovered that the American case was extremely special, that only 1% of the 22,000 denaturalization that has occurred in this country were linked to the time of war. That in addition to the 22,000 denaturalization, which means naturalized citizens who lose their citizenship by a decision of a court or the federal administration, 85,000 native-born Americans have been also deprived of their citizenship in the 20th century. And no study until this book has been made on what has happened, why, and why it's not happening anymore. Let me give you a small story. You have heard in the last weeks about this debate on the drone, on the executive power of the president. He decided to kill an American Yemenite in the middle of Yemen. And it provokes a lot of controversy. Is it the power of the president to execute a citizen without due process, etc., etc.? Last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, the Daily Telegraph published an article showing that 16 British citizens have been deprived of their citizenship, 2 of them being killed afterwards by American drones, without any discussion in the UK. And I think that 70 years ago, in the same kind of situation, the US president would have started by denationalizing or denaturalizing this Yemenite American and then kill him as a foreign enemy. And nobody would have talked about him because he was just a foreign enemy combatant. And it is because of the story I tell, because of the protection given by the Supreme Court after 30 years of battle to all American born and naturalized in this country, that now the president will want to kill an enemy combatant who is American, has to go through all these controversies. So let's start with the story. It started in 1906 with a provision in the Naturalization Act that says that in case of fraud and illegality, the government has to institute denaturalization proceeding in front of a federal court. Why that provision? In 1868, in this city of New York, in the months preceding the presidential election, 60,000 foreigners are naturalized by 2 judges. And if Ulysses Grant wins the presidential election, the Republican, the governor of this state, who is a Democrat, wins the state by 10,000 votes. And so the Republicans start an investigation in Congress, find false or fraud, could not pass the bill they wanted, but then there was a big scandal in St. Louis 2 years later, and it's under the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt that finally the commission is set and the reform of naturalization is passed, which keep something you might not remember: local state courts deciding on naturalization, but permitting the federal government, in case of fraud or illegality, to go to a federal court and to ask for the cancellation of the naturalization. So until 1940, all the immigrants in this country, the majority of immigrants, would go not to the federal administration to be naturalized, but to a state court. And if it has changed, it is because of the power of the denaturalization proceeding that has been instituted in the United States. Why? Because the law says if the government knows about an illegality or fraud, they have to institute the proceeding. In the following months, after the act was passed, the number is so huge and rising. Because, for example, the immigrants who come to court, they have witnesses. So the court asks the witnesses, can you tell me when you arrived in the US, 1900, for example? When were you naturalized, 1904? Oh, 1904. You didn't get the 5 years. So let's go to denaturalization. Probably half of the Americans who have been naturalized at that time were illegally naturalized. Probably. And it was a so huge disturbance of the society that the Attorney General of President Taft, George Wickersham, ordered to stop the implementation of the law. And he says, I order the US Attorney not to institute proceeding of denaturalization because half of the naturalized will be denaturalized, probably, but to do it only for the benefits of the citizenry. And what did he mean by that? He says, it meant either to fight the corruption of the courts, to bring integrity in the process. That was one category of case. And the second category of cases, it was when the people who have been naturalized have been showing some kind of un-Americanism. They were not good Americans for different reasons. So within the first category, it concerns probably 1/3 of the denaturalization of the whole century. With the first category, the purpose of the federal government was to take control of naturalization. How did they do that? They said to the court, well, we don't like to have cases in the federal court, to have your decision reversed, cancelled, etc. Let's work together. Let's have the people come first to our office, fill their application. Let's just make sure the application is legal and fairly filled, and let's go to the court afterwards. And of course, the judges wanted that more. They were fed up. They were not making enough money after the Congress has limited the fee for the proceeding. And so, progressively, and there was a turning moment in 1926, the federal government took control of the naturalization proceeding, first through the federal court, and more through the federal administration. But then there was the second category, the denaturalization for being un-American. And it starts with the very person you might have heard of, Emma Goldman. Emma Goldman was a very, very popular anarchist and feminist leader who was able to gather crowds of thousands, dozens of thousands of workers all around the United States. She became American by marrying an immigrant who has been himself naturalized, who was a Jew from Russia. But she has divorced from him after 1 year of marriage. So 20 years later, they tried to find how to stop Emma Goldman coming back from Europe. She was at the anarchist congress in Amsterdam in 1907. Well, they cannot stop her because she comes back from Montreal. She arrived and they find finally that they investigate in Rochester, where she was living, etc. And finally they found she was naturalized the way I described. So they went after her former husband, who probably has died at that time, found that he lied about his date of birth and his age, denaturalized him in 1909, and by deduction, her own naturalization is cancelled. She's deported only 10 years later by Edgar Hoover, 1990. When she's about to be deported, some of her friends offer her to marry again because she was divorced. And because at that time, until 1922, the Cable Act, if a foreign woman marries an American man, she's becoming immediately American. She refused. She's sent to Soviet Union because she believed in the Soviet Revolution. But a few years, 2 years later, she's out of Russia. She's in Riga, very depressed, and she asked her lawyer if he could not find her a man to marry her and as to come back in what she considered her home, the United States. But exactly at that moment, the feminist movement wins its battle and permit the American woman not to become foreigner by marrying a foreigner, which was also the rule, and women became free to keep their citizenship while marrying a man of another nationality, which was a battle they have fought in the last 15 years or so. One of the consequences is that Emma Goldman will never come back to the US and will die at the border of the country in Toronto in 1940. But in addition to her, and they found this illegality on her husband's denaturalization to denaturalize her, there are people who have been naturalized legally, and they have become socialists, communists, and then some of them will become Nazi. So here there is a sort of, as you said in English, there is not a very good word to translate that in French. The law is construed by the courts in a way I will describe. As you know, there is a pledge of allegiance when you are naturalized. And so the court says, basing its reasonings on sociological studies, as integration progresses year after year, if 20 years after your naturalization you say you are against the First World War, so you show unfaithfulness to the country, it means that at the moment of your naturalization, you had a mental reservation. You lied. And based on this concept of mental reservation, German-Americans who opposed the war, the First World War, some socialists, anarchists, communists, were denaturalized, starting during the First World War and in the later war. In addition to this political denaturalization, some Asian Americans, especially the ones who fought with the American troops as foreigners in the First World War and who had been naturalized by local judges, were denaturalized too, and the naturalized who lived abroad also were automatically losing their citizenship. Yet, at the eve of the Second World War, it was the German-Americans who were the concern of the Justice Department, especially of the Attorney General Jackson, who was the Attorney General of Roosevelt at that time. And they tried to pass a provision permitting more legal possibility of denaturalization, but finally they couldn't get the Congress to vote that, and they kept they used the concept of mental reservation as to go after the German-American link to the Bund, which was a Nazi organization in the country. So that's a very interesting story, because it's 1942. It is the only moment of the American history where there is a federal program of denaturalization. There is an order, an instruction given by Francis Biddle, the Attorney General, to initiate all over the country, to mobilize all the US attorneys all over the country, and to go to start denaturalization of all the German American linked to the Nazi organization. It is Edgar Hoover who is managing the campaign in cooperation with the Immigration Service. They go after 5,000 people. It's not easy. The judges are not easy always to convince, to denaturalize, but the big big backlash they get comes from the Supreme Court. And here it will be the second part of my presentation. Starting in 1943, the Supreme Court, which until that moment has been very cooperative with the federal government in its jurisprudence as to permit and to consider constitutional and legal denaturalization, start being very reluctant. And the first case, a very interesting case, is a communist named Schneiderman. His lawyer is a woman, probably one of the rare women who got a degree of a law school in 1920 from NYU. So she was a lawyer in New York, fighting for the right of immigrants, of blacks, of foreign-born. She, very early in her career, found that she would won cases with a lot of difficulty being a woman, especially when she had to go to the Supreme Court. So for all cases that had to reach the Supreme Court, she would ask a colleague to take the case with her. So for this case, she asked somebody you might have heard of, the Republican candidate to the presidential election of 1940, Wendell Willkie. And Willkie accepted. And so in 1942, and because the case was reheard in 1943, in the Supreme Court, in the middle of two presidential campaigns, you have the Republican candidate, Wendell Willkie, defending the right of citizenship of a communist, the secretary of the Communist Party of California, William Schneider, in the name of American value of freedom of speech, of freedom of opinion, of the right, even if you disagree with this person, the right of this person to have his ideas. Because Mr. Schneiderman never broke the law, which is what the main argument. He was campaigning for these ideas, but he was never in illegality, he was not legally naturalized. He had just been denaturalized by a federal court for being communist and for expressing communist ideas. So Willkie won after an incredible battle in the courts, where in the minority you find Justice Frankfurter becoming completely insulting his colleagues. He not only insulting his colleagues, look what he wrote to the Chief Justice who was writing the dissent opinion, Harlan. He says, I suggest you put this paragraph in your opinion. Surely the Congress has the right to exact from aliens to whom the privileges of citizenship are granted, attachment to the principle of the Constitution of the United States, as much as the USSR has the right to exact, and as exacted, devotion to its principle for Russian citizens. Isn't it interesting that Frankfurter was making a parallel between the kind of allegiance you could legally ask or constitutionally ask from naturalized citizens toward the United States, the same kind of allegiance the Soviet power was asking to Russian citizens. So he was in the minority, he was defeated, and the legal basis of the reversal was that in case of denaturalization, there is a need to show the level of proof you have in criminal law here in this country. So you have to have evidence which are clear, unequivocal, and convincing. And it was not the case for Schneider. 1 year later, there is another case of a Nazi, Baumgartner, and it is Frankfurter who is delivering the majority opinion, following Schneiderman, not exactly, but reversing the denaturalization, and that ends the program that has been initiated by the federal government. It's very interesting that this case came in the Supreme Court during the Second World War. First, it showed the independence of the court, who has been pressured not to take the Schneiderman case by the cabinet of Roosevelt, and took the case and reversed the decision. But it has also a consequence on the Cold War period, because I've been asked, what happened during the Cold War? Well, not so much, because there was that jurisprudence. There was a lot happening in other fields. Many civil servants lost their job. You have a lot of things during the Cold War and the McCarthy period. But in terms of denaturalization, 15 occurred in the 50s. Not so many compared to what has happened in other fields because of this previous jurisprudence. Now what is very interesting, it is that the cases, the concern of the Supreme Court shifts to a category of cases that nobody thought could have come to the court. It was the cases of American-born citizens. Because in 1940, against the will of Roosevelt, Congress has decided that if you vote in foreign election, if you escape the draft, if you join a foreign army or a foreign service, you lose automatically your citizenship. I know some people in this room who are French and American, who probably has voted in the last presidential election of France, who would, in this frame, would have immediately lost their American citizenship. And many of Americans at that time lost it. So when the first cases arrived in the court, Chief Justice Weil was aghast at the idea that an American born could be, by an executive decision, by Congress, by an act, deprived of citizenship. So he immediately, I could find that in his papers. To write this book, I worked in the National Archives, in the Presidential Archive, but it's also in the archive of 10 different justices. And in the papers, in fact, it was the paper of Justice Douglas, because he was taking notes of every conversation in the court, I found that in the first cases, Warren says it's unconstitutional, together with Justice Black. But that was 1955. Then come three cases, 1957, 1958. A Japanese American who happened to be in Japan when the war starts. He is drafted in the Japanese army, and then he's deprived of citizenship for having joined a foreign army. In that case, the majority of the court says there is no constitutional issue. He joined the army under duress. You cannot consider that he voluntarily joined the Japanese army. But there was two other cases. There was an American named Trump, who was born in, I think, in California. He has only American citizenship. He was in Casablanca. 1942, he's depressed. He goes out his army facility for one day. He's out, and he's on his way back when he's arrested by some American soldiers, sent to a military court, condemned and deprived of his American citizenship for being a deserter. And there is the other case, the name Perez, the guy named Perez, born in New Mexico, brought back to Mexico by his Mexican parents, raised there, and discovering in his 20s that he's American, coming to America, and then deprived of his American citizenship because he has been drafted in Mexico, and he has voted in the Mexican election. What is interesting is that on the three cases, Warren wins the first vote. I mean, their vote in June 57, he got 5 votes against 4. Then he asked his clerk to write the opinion, and they are so badly written that he lost the majority of the 3 cases when they reheard them, after they reheard them in October. absolutely furious, and he wants to try to gain the majority, at least in one or two of the cases. And it is when something happens, and I will have you perhaps share this document. I discover in these papers these 5 pages, you will see, of handwritten notes about these 2 cases. And I want to read 17 points, handwritten, an extraordinary discovery. And here 3 of them. Whether the concept was of compact federalism, sovereignty of the individual, or some other, citizenship is the basic and inalienable right of the individual. In the constitutional debates, the Federalist or other contemporary literature, there is no suggestion that Congress be given the right to denaturalize citizens. I'm convinced that such a suggestion would have been shocking to the founding fathers and the American people. It should still be shocking. So I found that, I was finishing my book, I thought it would be just I go to the archive, finish. I found that, I come back to Paris, and I copied this document and I sent it to the clerk of Warren, who you might have heard of, Judge John Newman, who was said he was the senior judge on the Second Circuit. And I set an appointment with him, he's in Florida, so midnight in Paris, 6 p.m. a Sunday afternoon in Florida. And I said, so it's like an instruction. This document appeared to me as an instruction to his clerk. So I said, have you seen that? Do you remember something about it? I said, he says, first of all, I've never seen this document. Secondly, I thought it was not one. But I checked with the clerk who worked with him for Brown versus Brown litigation, and we went on the website, and it's clearly Warren. So now let me tell you something. We think Warren was never to write that by himself. But I said, what do you mean? In French, I don't know. I see Chief Justice Warren, my hero, etc. He said, no, we think that something, probably Warren was sitting with another colleague of the court in his office, or the office of the colleague, and he was taking notes of what the other colleague would tell him. I said, what? And this note has been taken on a stenographer pad. Like his secretary was probably taking notes. So that was collapsing on the end of my book. And I was in Paris. I said, I have to go back to the archives, and I have to find who is this justice. And I asked John Newman, who do you think it could be? He said, Brennan. We think it's either Brennan or Black. And I don't think it's Brennan because he was not with Warren in this case, but I have to check. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to do all the justices' papers on all the denaturalization and denaturalization cases, and to add what has become 40% of my book, the battle in the court. The detailed battle in the court. And I reconstituted all the battle. And what is fascinating, because it has a big impact on your citizenship today, the following story. On the case of Trump, who became stateless in Casablanca, John Newman, who doesn't like me to say he wrote the opinion, he worked on it, based his writing, or his work, on a dissent of the chief judge of the Second Circuit, who based his own opinion on the Yale Law Journal note written anonymously by a Yale Law student, who is alive and who I interviewed. And these Yale Law students, in his comment of the law that permitted the denaturalization of Americans, says it's contrary to the 8th Amendment. that forbid cruel and unusual punishment. And it is on that basis that Mr. Trump came back to his American citizenship. That the fact that the government has made him stateless was decided contrary to the 8th Amendment. But that didn't protect Mr. Perez, because Mr. Perez was not made stateless by losing his American citizenship because he was still a Mexican. And the opinion in Trump, quote, an Arendt who says, citizenship is the right to have right. But the court could say, well, he has right in Mexico. And so a dual citizen can strip him of his citizenship, or her, because he or she has right elsewhere. So how do you protect the dual citizen? They had to find something. And it is in that circumstance that they met with Black. And they read another terrible draft written by another clerk who was speaking about sovereignty, sovereignty. And suddenly, I think, Black says, sovereignty, it's the sovereignty of the citizen, it's not the sovereignty of the state. This country was created by its citizen who created the state. So the citizens are the sovereign, and they cannot be stripped of the citizenship by their delegate in power. That was the concept, the idea behind what would become the dissent opinion of Chief Justice Warren in Paris. But he was in the minority. And then you had another case in '62 where the majority changed 3 times in 2 years until they got again a majority. And then you had '64, an incredible case, a woman who was a German immigrating at 6 years old, went to Smith College, went sent to Paris in a Fulbright, fall in love with a German student, married him, moved to Hamburg, and then when she renewed her passport, was said, sorry, you have come back to your country of former citizenship, you have lost your American citizenship. So she went, she battled 8 years. Her name was, she's still alive, Schneider, and she won. Not on the basis of the sovereignty of citizens, on the basis of the 5th Amendment. But the same day, an American citizen who has joined Castro in '62 was deprived of his American citizenship despite being made stateless. So that contradicted a little Trump. The jurisprudence of the court became a mess. The commentators say that. And it is when, and 2 years later, the majority of the court followed Warren. Black delivered a majority opinion in a case involving an Israeli American named Afroy, who was voted in a Knesset election, and the court says you cannot strip an American citizen of your citizenship except he or she decide not to be any more American. So I will end perhaps my presentation here. This story I told you the consequence it has for the George story. I think it has a consequence. I can elaborate more on that if you are interested. On the debate you have about are the people born from undocumented parents in the United States, are they American under the 14th Amendment? I think implicitly the unanimous court in these cases says yes. But that's another story. I'm stopping here because I think I've spoken too much. Thank you.
Patrick, I'll just start off with a very simple question about the Republican Party back in the time of Wendell Willkie, who took this position, which may have been probably not welcomed by his fellow Republicans. What was the reaction? I'm just curious how Republicans reacted in the 40s, because it seems to be a sort of uniformity of view among some Republicans today. What was the reaction of his fellow Republicans?
Well, you know better American history than I do. but from what I heard, it's quite recent and forgotten that the Democrat got the vote of the African American in this country. It started when I think even Nixon got a lot of votes from, because the Republican Party was not associated, well, it was associated with the abolition of slavery, with all liberties. And not only when the Wilkie is a kind of hero of the book, but I think another hero, even better, more hero than he is George Wickersham, who is the Attorney General of President Taft. Wickersham hates denaturalization. There is one US attorney who has obtained from the federal court in the state of Washington the denaturalization of the socialists. He imposed the US attorney to go back to the court and reinstall him in this institution. And so you have this Republican tradition, liberal tradition, I think, of the East, that perhaps has disappeared, but was quite strong until the 50s, I think. And so I think he was representing one of the as the Democrat had also a lot of diversity, I would say, between the southern racists and the defensors of immigrants, of workers. I think the Republican Party had also a lot of diversity at that time, and I think Wilkie expressed his expression of that diversity.
Let's open it up for questions. I'd like to go second.
Yes, I have a question. In the last 5 years, let's say, what percentage of denaturalization have you come across? Can you give me a figure?
So there are very few now. They are still permitted under very strict scrutiny of the Supreme Court. I would say that in the recent years, the US government has targeted the people who have been involved in crime against humanity. The people who lied about their involvement in the Shoah, there was 100 cases starting in 1974 until now, so you have like 3-4 cases per year. And you had also cases of people involved in genocidal activities in the ex-Yugoslavia war, in some war in Africa. So that's the target of there is a special office of investigation against these criminals. And in addition to that, you have few cases related to fraud, but these cases occur in the years following the naturalization. And Congress wanted to give the power of denaturalization to the executive. The court refused, and so they have to go to court to get to obtain denaturalization. So that's are the two main categories. I would say that it is very interesting because in fact denaturalization is a sort of reflects some aspect of the country. I mean, the denaturalization of un-Americans in the 20s reflects what was moved at that time. The most restrictive period for immigration, the most, and today the involvement of the US in global human rights, etc., is reflected in the way you only target genocidal or crime against humanity activities.
Terrific talk, by the way. Thank you very much. You had mentioned at the outset that you had started this effort as a comparative study between the U.S., the U.K., and China. And I wondered if you could just spend a minute telling us what you felt are some of the main differences in how we approach denaturalization here, with an emphasis less on maybe specific idiosyncrasies in history, but more maybe the different approaches, the philosophical approaches that the different countries have in viewing citizenships and rights and human rights. maybe that's one.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. First of all, there is a similarity between France and the US as a sort of will to control the proceedings and not make it, not have fraud, etc. In a special circumstance, it is done in France in the 20s, compared to what is done also in the US at the same time. The second convergence I feel, it's a very interesting convergence, is that as much as the US Supreme Court was extremely reluctant to back the government during the Second World War in his program on denaturalization, the French court, the Conseil d'État, was very reluctant to back the French government and parliament in its denaturalization program that concerned German and French during the First World War. And the government was so unhappy with the resistance of the administrative Supreme Court that the parliament shifted the power of judicial review from the administrative court to the Court of Cassation in 1917 because they were very unhappy with the resistance of the court. So that's quite interesting to see our democracies, and that's a big difference with totalitarian or authoritarian regime. Our democracies, I mean, you have a strong resistance toward this kind of policies, even among the civil servants. So you have I would say the political pressure to do it, in Congress especially. But you have a split government, split decision, and the role of the courts is quite interesting. So today in France, you have also one or two per year. It can occur, contrary to what happened in the US, for activities that has been developed after the naturalization, but only in the 10 years following naturalization. The country where it's the most, the country that has given the executive power the highest power, the highest discretionary power is the UK. And you can, I just mentioned to 16 in the last 2 years, if you are considered as being acting with the interest of the country, the Home Secretary can strip you of citizenship without going to court. It's quite interesting to see that it is in the UK that you have the less judicial control in these matters.
Thank you. Am I right in understanding that denaturalization applied to foreigners who have become American, but not to Americans who, for one reason or another, had dual nationality?
Yes, but for them, there were the other cases, which was denationalization, and when I mentioned Perez, he was born American in New Mexico. So, he was American by birth, and Mr. Trump was only American, born American, and he was not naturalized. So, in fact, Congress expanded what they have done for the naturalized to all Americans in 1940. And 85,000 Americans born lost their citizenship between 1940 and 1977. It's not a small number. It's a very big number. What?
Why they lost it?
Well, I tried to explain, and they voted for an election, they resided abroad, they joined the foreign army, they escaped the draft. That was different reasons. So,
yeah, when one is naturalized now as an American citizen, foreign-born citizen who becomes naturalized, you're supposed to refuse any allegiance to any foreign prince, any sovereign state that is not the United States. However, in practice, it's not enforced because a lot of people, as you said, have dual citizenships now. So could we imagine now a situation where, in case of serious criminal activity, a naturalized citizen could also be denaturalized, except in cases of extreme terrorism?
You cannot have a retroactive law. So if you take the current statutes, you can only be denaturalized for acts committed before or in the process of your naturalization.
Right.
So if, for example, the federal administration discovered that you didn't inform in your application, or you lied in your application, or you didn't declare some activities that could have prevented you, if known by the naturalization service to naturalize you, then they can denaturalize you. They cannot anymore, if you follow the jurisprudence of Schneiderman or Baumgartner, and that was exactly the point, they cannot denaturalize you because after your naturalization, you become a fascist, a communist, a terrorist, or whatever. Well, when there was this attack, it was in Times Square, I think Senator, former Senator of Connecticut, Lieberman proposed to add a provision that would permit denaturalization in case of terrorism. You have it in the French law, or you have it in the, but you don't have it in the American law. It was what the Bush administration wanted to do in the Patriot Act #2, but it didn't pass Congress. So yes, it is always debated. I mean, in the 30s, member of the Congress wanted this kind of provision for acts committed after naturalization, but it's not in the statute.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Maybe this is out of context, but they are in France. They are talking about people, French people who have dual nationalities.
Yes.
Like French and American, like others, you know. Do you think that France will be able to take out the French nationality of the French people because they become American citizens or another?
No.
Because they are living here and they have to be here?
No, no way. First of all, that's very interesting. Having, as Claude just mentioned, the US was very reluctant toward dual allegiance. They have to accept it because it's a fact that you cannot change that. France and the UK were very open, historically, very open. So the dual citizenship was accepted since the beginning of the 20th century in France and in the UK. And the provision on denaturalization were passed in both countries as to prevent, for example, Franco-German to go to war for Germany. In that case, you understand that you don't want this person to keep the French citizenship. So, but it was a sort of compensation to a very liberal approach of the citizenship. So there is no way that you have, of course, some MPs who attack the dual citizen. The attack on the dual citizen is not only in Europe, it's also in this country. And so they are always suspected, often suspected of not being faithful to the country, etc. It's not on the agenda. Cannot be.
Okay, thank you.
Can you readdress the Yemenite case? Because now I'm confused. It looks like you cannot denaturalize someone for terrorist activity, but it looks like this guy was not only lost his citizenship, but on top of it was killed. So it goes against.
Okay, so the Yemeni American has joined the foreign army. Okay, like the guy who joined Castro. Okay, so on that basis, he could have been denationalized, even if he was born American. Then he would be only Yemenite. Then you kill him as a Yemenite. Who care in this country if you kill Al-Qaeda Yemenite? Could have made a small paragraph in the New York Times. Okay, that's what I want to say. If you had killed him as a Yemenite, nobody would have cared. It's because he was still American that suddenly you think, oh my God, it can happen to me, well, we have been in circumstances, etc., etc. So the Supreme Court jurisprudence has restricted the power of the government to strip you of your citizenship.
So the terrorist activity has nothing to do with the Yemenite case?
No, I mean, he has not, if he was born American, he cannot be strict. He can be
killed.
convinced, he can be killed, he can be
be stripped
Yes,
of your life.
and
you were born and died a U.S. citizen.
No, I would like to.
The drone took you out.
I think the person who was the most clearest for the interpretation of the American Constitution in that context was Justice Black. And I will read you what, in fact, he didn't put in his opinion. It shows, it illustrates what I feel, and in New York, that sometimes things which are very important are not in the opinion. They are sometimes in the draft, in the exchange of them. So let me read you what he says. Section 1st of the 14th Amendment that confers citizenships and now a person born here with citizenship also provide that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall deprive the privilege of or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The first of these two clauses plainly makes privileges and immunity of United States citizenship free from abridgment by the states. The amendment then goes on to recognize the power in states to deprive all persons, including citizens, of life, liberty, or property if they are afforded due process of law. But even if afforded due process of law, the state is granted no power under the 14th Amendment to deprive any person of the citizenship granted by the 14th Amendment.
But is the logic of that argument then that the Obama or any other administration cannot use a drone to kill an American citizen?
No. I think it can kill on the due process. A kind of process, and some people have argued that due process doesn't mean go to court, it can be a special.
But that hasn't happened yet.
Exactly. It is what is debated.
Yeah.
What is interesting is that you can be killed, but you will be killed as a citizen. The citizen is a statute, a basic statute of human beings, of humanity, which is it's very important. This jurisprudence is extremely important. And it's important not only for the US, but for the rest of the world, considering the number of people who were stateless after the Second World War, and they knew that when they did this work.
So is there a connection between crimes against humanity and citizenship?
No. There is a connection between the fact that naturalization is not a right. If you are very liberal on the left, here or in France, people will say, I've been there for 5 years, I want my citizenship, and you don't consider that the government can refuse it. You refuse to give it to you. So there are some conditions. The citizenship has a dual dimension. When you are outside, it's a club you want to enter. When you are inside, it's a public good. I mean, how many baby you do, they are citizens. You can add to the club how many number you can or you won't. But when you are outside, you have to follow the rules of entrance. If the rule of entrance is that you cannot be having committed a crime against humanity, and you lied, and you said you didn't tell the people at the entrance of the club that you have done that, then retroactively they can say, sorry, there was a fraud. We admitted you without knowing all what you have done. So sorry, you have never been member. That denaturalization brings you back at the time of the naturalization. When you are denaturalized, it means you have never been American. When you are denaturalized, you lose your American citizenship, but you have been American. When you are denaturalized, you have never been American.
But Patrick, then do you become stateless, or do you become the citizen of the country you came from?
Well, that is very interesting because America doesn't care. Okay? The European cares, they don't permit denationalization if you are stateless. The US don't care.
Sorry, what did you say? You said it's a club if you're on the inside?
Outside.
Oh, you're on the outside. How did you characterize it if you're on the inside?
It's a public good.
Oh, public good, that's right.
Okay.
What if you have, you said, there is some French that have dual nationality. Well, if you're French and you have, for instance, a dual nationality that's not American, and you live in America and you want to become a citizen in America, will they force you to give up one of your other two nationalities? Basically, then you have free passport.
You can have free passport. You can
In
have 4 or
America.
5, yeah. The problem is that you think it's good always, I'm not sure. What has happened to this poor guy who was Canadian Syrian on his way back from vacation in Tunisia at GFK. He was controlled, his name was on Al-Qaeda list, whatever. He was back to Canada. He was born in Syria, so they checked. They arrested him. The Canadian government gave false and bad information about him, saying they don't want him to be back. And they sent him to Syria, where he was tortured for 1 year until a Canadian NGO mobilized for his case, obtained that the Canadian government got him back from Syria, where he was so tortured that he's now handicapped for life. So there was a very big investigation in Canada that led to a formal exclusion of the chief of the government. And they gave him a compensation of 58 million Canadian dollars. It was a very big story. And he sued the American government. And it went to the Second Circuit. And there was a very strong dissent from Guido Calabresi. You can find it. It's an incredible, because this guy, they checked, born in Syria, Syrian. The guy said, I'm Canadian. Well, you are also Syrian. For us, there is no priority. And the Canadian government says, we don't care of you. Then they send you to Syria. There is one thing I've learned recently, that when you are naturalized in Switzerland, in your passport, they don't put any more place of birth, Syria, France. They say place of origin, the place of your naturalization. So the origin is a city where you have been naturalized, because they have to go through the process of getting the approval of the local city. So that's very restrictive, no? Of course. But one of the advantages when on your passport, the Swiss passport, your foreign origin doesn't appear anymore, which I think is quite good for many reasons.
Do you think it will, other countries will follow?
Oh, I don't think so. But I feel it's good to learn about other countries, because you can pick good practices, and sometimes in a conversation you can mention them, and sometimes you can sway toward other foreign law.
Excuse me, what do you think about all these Asians come to America and have babies, and the babies become American citizens, and then you have like mariage en blanc?
Okay, the encore baby. Encore baby. So let me tell you a story. I am now working on cases of change of residence and voluntary expatriation as to evade taxes. It's a big story. There was one case very interesting in this country. He's one of the founders of Facebook, who was originally a Brazilian, and 1 week before becoming multi-billionaire, moved to Singapore and came back to his Brazilian citizenship. So it provoked also big reaction from your Senator Schumer proposal. Okay, so I discovered this case, that's between you and me, because I was contacted by a Swiss lawyer who wanted to write a dissertation and have me as an advisor on citizenship for investment. I must say, the first time I talking to me about that, I didn't know what he was meaning. And then I understood he was meaning the Cayman Island and Canada, and St. Kitts, I can tell you, it's a paradise for many Americans. And then, so he's doing his dissertation not with me, but he's fond of my work, even if I totally disagree with him. So he's inviting me in his company's event, where he gathered the Minister of Justice of St. Kitts and some other. And one day I was there, and there was a former US attorney who has become a lawyer advising all these Americans who want to escape their taxes. And then there was a question, what about having babysitters? Are you crazy? You want your son or your daughter to pay taxes in the US for the rest of their life? It's the worst idea you could sell to your client to have babies with American citizenship, because wherever they reside, if they are wealthy, they pay taxes the rest of their life. So you hear people think about Uncle Baby as a burden for America, but some other mind, it is the opposite. Oh, why am I an American? My parents gave that to me by having me born in a hospital in New York. I want to get rid of my American citizenship and pay taxes here, etc. So it's a very interesting study. You have to see it through all angles.
Can you give up your American citizenship?
Yes, but you have to pay an exit tax, which is quite high. On your fortune, you have you have to live abroad. You have many conditions. So I think, frankly, I think the investigation that was published by The Guardian and Le Monde was published also by New York Times. You know about all this?
Yes.
Yes, offshore list, etc. Washington Post? Okay, so that's becoming a world issue. And I think for the sake of our democracy, we have to find ways of having our wealthiest citizens paying their due to their countries. Otherwise, people will revolt because they are asked more and more to compensate with their own money the debt of the state that sometimes comes from the policies implemented by these wealthiest people who escape their taxes.
Shall we end on that?
People and companies.
I had a question to that. Is there any international treaty or regulation or United Nations directive on nationality and dual citizenship? That's the first part of the question. And the second part, is there in practice an admittance by certain countries, in particular of the United States, that you don't have 100% right of citizenship if you are in your country of origin? I renewed recently my American passport. I've been American for 11 years, and there is a little notice saying that if you are in your country of origin, basically the message is that, hey, if you have a problem, you can go to the American consulate in any country except in your country of origin.
So that's very interesting. I mean, if you are dual citizen, imagine you are French and American. You cannot claim you are French when you are in the US, and you cannot claim you are American when you are in France. You can claim one of them anywhere else, but you don't have a choice. When you are in one of the countries, that's what. The second issue is that yes, there are international conventions. I mentioned one of them. There are European Convention on Nationality that deal with statelessness mainly and dual citizenship. You have International Convention on statelessness, fighting statelessness. You have International Convention on the right of women in nationality. One of the main reasons of dual citizenship is it's why it will never disappear. It is because of equality and men and women. Because until I mentioned Emma Goldman, she took the citizenship of her husband. That's finished. The consequence of that is that women as men transmit their citizenship to their kids. So at birth, the kids have a double or triple, etc. So you are not going to ask the kids to choose between mother and father. So it's why I think since women has gained equality of rights in terms of citizenship, the consequence is the development of dual citizenship or multiple citizenship.
Excuse me, they said also if you are from a different, for example, American and French, and you have kids,
Yeah.
they have to choose.
No, they don't have to choose.
Not anymore?
Not at all. They never have to choose.
Because, oh no, they
No.
can have both.
They can have both. That's the
I have a 10-month-old who has a French passport and a US passport. He hasn't elected yet.
No, the only country where you have this choice that has been imposed, but not on people born from both parents, is Germany, who has decided that the people born from foreign parents are German, that they have to choose as a majority. And I don't think at all it's a good system. I think they are going to go through a lot of cases in the courts, including European courts of human rights, etc. For the moment, the kids have a maximum of 13 years old. Soon, in the next 4 or 5 years, it will be a huge debate in Germany. But for the moment, the cases are not come.
Patrick, thank you. We wish you well with your book.
Thank you. I can sign and sell a copy of this book at the rate of offers, which is very low, $25. And for those who are interested. Thank you.